For over a year, I've had Super Lucky's Tale on my hard drive and I have been meaning to play it. When I finally decided to play it though, I noticed that there was another version of the game called New Super Lucky's Tale available on Game Pass. So I decided to play that new version. Completing the first homeworld of this new version was actually a really enjoyable experience. The platforming felt really smooth, the graphics and environments looked really nice and detailed. The characters had a lot of personality and charm too. But then I decided to switch to the older version and complete that game first before completing New Super Lucky's Tale. And I gotta tell you, that older version is really disappointing. If you were to switch back and forth between both versions, you would never want to play the older version of Super Lucky's Tale. You can't even turn your camera to look behind you. The camera doesn't even move smoothly either. It only moves a couple ticks to the left and to the right. So if you ever need to backtrack in a level for collectibles, it will get really annoying because you can't even look behind you. The game does give you the option to freely move your camera close from Lucky's perspective, but I don't get the point of adding this option if you still can't turn around. The limited camera also makes platforming very frustrating at times because it gets very hard to judge jumps since you can't move the camera freely. This also makes combat with enemies frustrating since most enemies can only be defeated by jumping on top of them. So a lot of times you'll end up missing and taking damage. The enemies themselves are also frustrating too, since your basic tail whip attack does no damage to them and it only stuns them no matter how many times you hit them. And enemies can still hurt you even when they're stunned. So if you want to stun them and then jump on top of them, you'll still end up getting hurt sometimes because the camera will mess up your jump and you'll land right next to them and take damage. Most enemies play like this except for two, where one of them can only be damaged by hitting these bombs back to them, and this rock golem type of enemy, which is the only enemy in the game that I believe can get damaged by tail whips. But these two enemies don't show up often in the game, so you have to deal with the other enemies for a majority of the game. The limited camera will turn away a lot of people, but if you do stick with the game, you will eventually notice some bright spots of old Super Lucky's Tale. The game does offer a lot of variety in its levels. You have 3D levels, 2D levels, auto runners, statue puzzles, and ball rolling puzzles. In the traditional 3D and 2D levels, all you have to do is make it to the end while collecting the secret clovers, coins, and the letters to spell lucky. It's a standard collectathon which, even with the limited camera, is still fun to do. Getting 300 coins in a level grants you a clover, but the coins also act as currency to buy costumes for Lucky to wear, and it can be pretty fun to mix and match different outfits. The story itself is pretty straightforward. While attempting to stop the evil cat Jinx and his children, the kitty litter, from taking the Book of Ages, you all get sent into the worlds within the book. Each homeworld has you helping out the residents that are trying to go up against a member of the kitty litter until eventually you have a boss fight with them. Sadly, the boss fights don't increase the difficulty from an already easy game. You'll most likely never lose a life in most of these boss fights. They might even be easier than the rest of the game since you're not really platforming. Lady Meowmalade and Jinx are the only two that are pretty interesting boss fights where you have to be careful on your jumps and balance between platforming and dodging attacks. Even though most of the boss fights are easy, the kitty litter themselves are funny when you interact with them. The last homeworld, Foxington, actually has a collection of combat, puzzle, and platforming levels. The puzzle and platforming levels increase the difficulty by a decent amount. The combat levels, though, are disappointing. There's only 3 of them, and 2 of them are just slightly more difficult versions of previous boss fights, but you still probably won't even lose a life. Overall, the old Super Lucky's Tale is alright. The camera will turn away a lot of people, but if you can look past that, then you could enjoy some decent platforming. But honestly, just don't ever touch old Super Lucky's Tale and play new Super Lucky's Tale instead. With the new camera, you can look wherever you want and it makes platforming so much easier. Also, while your regular tail whip attack still stuns enemies, when you walk up to a stunned enemy, you do a kick to defeat them. Stunned enemies now no longer do damage to you. They also reworked Lucky's digging ability. In the older game, you only had one speed and turning did not feel smooth at all. Also, in the 2D levels, you had to come out of the ground to change direction, which made some platforming sections annoying. In new Super Lucky's Tale, the digging ability feels so much smoother, as now you can adjust your speed and turn much more smoothly. They even added more interesting puzzles that involve your digging ability, which further exemplify how well this new and improved digging ability is. Additionally, they added a sliding move. In the older game, if you try to dig on surfaces that you can't dig in, you just do a dive and hit the surface. However, now you can slide on certain surfaces, which makes traversing some levels much more smooth. The better controls and camera does make the game feel a lot easier. So much so that I had around 80 lives by the end of the game, where in the older version I only had around 40. Yeah, you get a ridiculous amount of lives. I don't even know why they even bother adding lives, because you get so much, and since you rarely die, you almost never run out. Even though the game is much easier now, it's still fairer since you won't have misplaced jumps now. There are 2 difficult achievements where you have to beat the Meow Malade boss fight and beat the Wrigglemania levels without taking damage. The achievements exist in both games, but if you want to challenge yourself for those achievements, it should take a couple tries since you have to balance between precise platforming and fighting enemies. This is also a small detail, but it makes the game so much better. In the older version, when you defeated enemies, solved the statue puzzles, opened boxes, literally anything that would give you coins, you still had to go up to them and pick them up. So if you defeated an enemy, their coins still had a chance to fall off a map. Even in a 2D level where they fall off the X-axis plane where you can't walk to and drop off the map. Or in statue levels, you may not be able to pick up all the coins in time since some will disappear before you get to them. In new Super Lucky's Tale, the coins will automatically be given to you. It makes gameplay flow so much easier, as you don't have to worry about those coins disappearing on you and scrambling around to get them. Some levels are now more expansive in new Super Lucky's Tale. Due to the limited camera in the older version, everything the player needed to see had to be in front of them, so designs of levels were really limited. However, with the new improved camera, the developers had much more creativity in terms of level design. There's a level in the second homeworld where you have to help this band of worms play their music. In the older version, it's just a fairly straightforward level where you have to go around and hit these 6 switches. However, in new Super Lucky's Tale, you're rescuing the band members in a much more expanded level with a plethora of platforming sections, such as digging in this area while trying not to be seen while dodging obstacles, and bouncing on these platforms while not falling into the water. That being said, a lot of levels from the older version are added into new Super Lucky's Tale with some adjustments here and there. For the most part, this is fine, since the new camera actually makes these remade levels so much better than the older version. However, the developers could have updated the statue and ball rolling puzzles. In the older game, the statue puzzles started off really easy, and then eventually they did get confusing where I actually had to restart the puzzles a couple times. However, since the puzzles are exactly the same in new Super Lucky's Tale, I knew how to solve almost most of them right away. Also, the ball rolling puzzles could have been changed. They were fairly simple in the older version, and it would have been cool if they expanded on this minigame with much more elaborate designs. What really disappointed me though was the combat sections in Foxington, the last homeworld, are exactly the same as the older version, meaning it's just a slightly more difficult version of previous boss fights. They could have made the combat levels way more difficult and expanded. And there's only 3 of these combat levels. They could have tried to add a few more. Now this is where I get really nitpicky, but here we go. The developers should have added a level select from the pause menu. If you were missing a collectible from one of the levels, you would not be able to figure out which level it is until you go up to the level entrance itself. It would have been very convenient if you were able to see every level from the pause menu and be able to teleport to that level right away instead of just going to each home world and then walking to each level entrance. To be fair though, this really wasn't a huge problem for me because most of the time I try to get every collectible the first time I play a level, so I would never have to repeat levels, and thus there really wasn't a need for me to come back to a level. And I feel like most players, since this is a fairly easy collectathon and there's no real backtracking at all, most players who do play this game I think would probably get all the collectibles straight through and never would have to return. So honestly, it's not a huge deal that there's no level select, but for the people who don't collect everything the first time, this would be a convenient feature for them. Also, if you replayed a level, you have to watch the intro scene every single time without skipping it. It's just a short scene that glances through the level for a bit, but for the boss fights, where I had to take no damage for the achievements, I had to rewatch these scenes several times because it took me a decent amount of retries to finally get those achievements. Again, this is not really a huge issue, since for most levels, I would already have all the collectibles, and thus I wouldn't have to replay them. Also, if you get all the collectibles, nothing happens. You do get costumes for getting each collectible and each homeworld, but for collecting every collectible in the game, there's no cutscene or secret room or secret level or anything like that. In Foxington, you do get a short little cutscene for getting all the medals, but that's about it. Again, these are just small nitpicks that don't really mess up the overall experience. New Super Lucky's Tale improves so much on its predecessor that this is the definitive version you should play. If you're into collectathon platformers, you should definitely play New Super Lucky's Tale. It has smooth controls, the worlds and characters have plenty of personality, and it's just an overall fun experience. If you do want to try to play the old version first before you play the new one, you could, but honestly I feel like you should just go right to the new version just so you don't have to repeat levels from the older version that just got added on into the new version. It is an easy game, but honestly, if you just want to have a chill time without stressing about difficulty, then this is a fun game. However, if the developers plan on making a sequel, I would want them to increase the difficulty on the boss fights, because these boss fights in New Super Lucky's Tale were just way too easy. What do you all think though? Is New Super Lucky's Tale a fun platformer, or do you think it was too easy and simple? Let me know in the comments, I would love to hear your opinions on this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.